others that will be viewing this as well. So tonight we're going to go through session 4. You're going to have an opportunity to look at the activities, practice the activities with colleagues at your tables, and then we can answer any questions that you may have about the lesson. So we'll jump right into it, and again, we're going to get through majority of the activities. There is one section that is a review of several of the activities that have already occurred or maybe did not occur at your, with your particular cohorts, but you've seen these activities before. So we'll do a brief review of those and then really look at the new activities that have been built into session 4. So everyone, if they can first pull out the curriculum guide, which is the session 4, Explore Your Future, Part 2. So session 3 was Part 1, and now session 4 is Part 2. Very similar to what the other lessons have looked like. We have the overview of what you hope to accomplish as part of this lesson. So we have our learning objectives, which again is to revisit the past True2U activities. So from the feedback, from the surveys, as well as from the training that we had in October, we heard from many of the mentors that you did not have the opportunity to get through every activity. Part of it could be because the pre-work had not been done on the school end, or just timing itself, you didn't have the opportunity to do the activities. So we have built in time in this session for you to revisit 1 or 2 of those activities depending on where you are with your groups. Okay, so we'll look at those activities. We're also going to talk a lot about choices this time around, and the reason why we're doing that, as I've mentioned in previous sessions, students are going to be making high school choices. In January, they'll be going through the choice fair, meeting all the high schools in the Cleveland School District, and then they will actually be going online to select their choices. So we're going to talk about the high schools tonight, review those, and talk about just how do you make informed choices. And then, again, as I mentioned, we'll talk more about the high school. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at tonight. You'll see that there is the mentor pre-work, so very much like what we're going to do this evening, looking at the curriculum guide, revisiting the past activities, deciding with your mentor, your colleague mentor about which activities you're going to do with your cohort from the past activities, and then also just talk about how you're going to approach the new activities. The group size, again, it's your cohort size. There's some of the activities you might break out into smaller groups, but for the most part, you'll be staying with your larger cohort, your 10 to 12 students, depending on how many you have. And then you'll see the materials and supplies, so very much like every other session, all the schools will have the supplies. We'll be delivering everything that is needed for this, including the Starbursts, snacks, very, very similar to the other sessions. So we'll be delivering those to the schools early next week. If you move to page 2, again, you'll see the additional materials on here. So we will definitely make sure with the schools that they have the junior achievement materials. So if you didn't have the opportunity to do the brand activity, we'll make sure that they have the bendable sticks so that you can do that activity. The career cluster inventories, we're going to make additional copies so that we know the schools have them, because you may have looked at the posters and maybe the posters did not make it their way back into the tote. So we'll make sure that they have extra copies of that. And then the career advising template, we'll again make sure that there's additional copies. So you can work through and just see some of those other pieces that students will need for this session. And then you'll also see on page 2 the at a glance, which has been part of our previous lessons as well, and then the step-by-step. So the format is very similar to the first 3 lessons. Moving to page 4, we have the opening. And so again, all of the scripts that we put into the lessons are just suggestions. So again, we just give you kind of a path or a guide for the conversation, but of course you can add to it and tweak it for what you see fits for your group. But we do ask that there is a recap of the previous session. So just asking 2 to 3 students to reflect on the career feud game, the career maps, and then listening to the career stories and what did they gain from the stories that you shared, and then any of the other activities that you did as part of session 3.
Real quick comment, the scripts have been extremely helpful.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
It gives us the language and the words we need sometimes when we can't quite think of it.
Perfect. That's great to hear. Thank you very much. So then we're going to move now into our icebreaker. And as I mentioned during the training in October, from the feedback from either talking to you when we're on our school visits or through the survey itself, many of you said that an icebreaker would be helpful for each session just to kind of get the students warmed up for what you're about to do in the session. So we're going to do the icebreaker so that you can just kind of practice the icebreaker itself. So on your tables, you should have a few things. You should have the icebreaker questions that look like this, and there's colors. So there's red, pink, yellow, and orange on it. So each of you can grab this template. And then you have starbursts on your table as well. And so for the icebreaker, you're going to have students designate for students the starburst, so you can decide either they pick colors, or if you want to pick colors for the students, that's fine, however you want to do it. But each student should have a few of the colors, and they will then need to answer the question that's corresponding to the color of the starburst they have. So if they have the orange starburst and the pink starburst, they will answer the questions that correlate with that color. So we'll take probably about 4 minutes, if that's okay, to look at that activity, and then you can each practice it. Okay, so this one is pretty straightforward. Some of the comments that we had about the career feud is some of the students did not respond as well to the competitive nature, and so we wanted to have one that was a little bit more neutral, but also a way to have a treat starting off, but then also just a fun way to learn more about each other, because we did hear feedback that it was really nice to have that opportunity for students to learn more about you and your career, and many of you responded that it felt like this was the first time that you really clicked as a group, because that was your 3rd session. You've had some opportunity to really work with them. So this is just another way for students to give some more information about them on the surface level, and for you to know a little bit more about the student. So yes, to both of the points, if the questions don't work, moving forward with any of our mentors, you of course can always tweak them. I know we do have a few mentors that like to bring their own icebreakers, and that's fine as well. We just wanted to give examples of icebreakers and start out each session with that so that students can kind of warm up before they jump into the work. So great, thank you all for participating in that. We're going to move into activity 4B, which is revisiting the past True2U activities. So as I mentioned when I first opened, we did hear feedback that some of the activities were not completed because the pre-work had not been done, or some of the comments have been that that groups spent more time on one activity than get to complete another activity. And so we wanted to give time in this session to revisit past activities that have kind of been the foundational activities. So for example, the career advising, which was in session 3, we heard from a handful of mentors that they were somewhat rushed through that process, so they would like to go back and take a little bit more time with the career advising. So that is one suggestion. In addition to that, the career clusters. We did hear in the last drop-in session, before session 3, that the students really gravitated towards the career clusters, and that felt rushed as well, because for many of them, it's the first time they've really focused on the career clusters. So just understanding what each of the clusters are, and what professions you might find under those clusters. So we really wanted to give you that opportunity to decide which activities you wanted to revisit. Now, some of you might jump right into the Strengths Explorer, because we know that at that time in September, many of the students had not completed the Naviance. But at this point, students have been actively using Naviance and will have the Strengths Explorer results. So when you're looking at this, I would suggest that if your partner is here tonight, of course, talk about which activities out of the suggested revisiting activities you want to focus on, or if your partner's not here, just to look at and revisit those activities in the next 10 minutes, and then decide where your group is and which activity you want to do. Now, we do make mention that we kind of prioritize the activities, and there's some reason for that. So the career advising and career clusters, the second part of the lesson really does focus on high school choices. So having that career advising and a look at the career clusters will really help them for the second part of this lesson. You'll notice when we start talking about the high schools, we've aligned them with the career clusters. So if students are learning about those career clusters, they can see the connection now to the high school choices. So if you didn't get a chance to finish career advising or the career clusters, we recommend that be the priority activity for this next section. But if you feel like you were able to really get through career advising and career clusters, you might want to make mention of it for a couple of minutes and then really jump into the Strengths Explorer, because the Strengths Explorer is a very important activity as well, because that's when students started seeing those strength themes and understanding how those themes interact with their career interests and the type of activities and hobbies that they like to do. And then the other one is the Creating My Brand, which many of you probably remember seeing this, but it's the stuff from Junior Achievement. So they had the brand interview and then the bendable sticks. I think most of you got through this in session 1, but we did hear from a few schools that the Junior Achievement materials were not readily available and they were not able to do this particular activity. This was many students said that they really enjoyed this activity. I know from the mentor feedback, for the most part, we heard very positive things about this specific activity. But our recommendation is if you either have to get through career advising, career counseling, career advising or career clusters, or the Strengths Explorer, do those before you do brand, if there is even time to do brand. This is something that could be revisited later on. It may even end up being an icebreaker for you sometime. So let's say you didn't get to do this opportunity, this activity, maybe in February, instead of doing the icebreaker that we recommend, you could do the branding activity as the icebreaker. So that's just how we suggested gauging which activities you should do. Now, if you are a school that successfully got through all of the activities, our recommendation is to revisit them with the students just in a quick reflection, just recalling the activities for the students, asking them to recall the activities, and then you can move into the next activity, which would be looking at making good choices. So even though we put 45 minutes, if you feel like you successfully got through all of the activities that we've suggested to revisit, quickly recall them and then you can move through, which means that you would end your session a little bit earlier because you didn't do the complete 45 minutes, but that's okay as well. Okay, so let's take the next 10 minutes just to look over this section. All of the materials are starting on page 15, and you have additional materials on your table. So the branding inventory, the bendable sticks, those are on your table. The career cluster sheets, the inventory that the students filled out, as well as the posters are on your table. And then the Strengths Explorer and the career advising are attached in the addendum, starting on page 15. So we'll take 10 minutes to look that over, and you can talk with each other at your tables, and then we'll reconvene with any questions. So this next activity, which is 4C, I'm actually going to turn it over to Molly, and she's going to walk us through this activity, and then I'll come back on for the high school choice piece. So turn it over to Molly.
Okay, so as Kate was saying, they're going to be making big choices, and so this activity is designed to get them to start thinking about what choices there are and what the consequences of those choices might be. So what we've done is created different scenarios. So on your table, there should be printouts of the scenarios, and they're kind of collated into sets. Take a look at those. Okay, so there are 3 scenarios that go along with this activity. And what you're going to do is you're going to divide the students into 3 small groups. And there's an option with this activity. So if your group is one who likes to be active and really likes to be up and doing things and things like that, then they can do role playing for this activity. If your group is more of a reflective kind of discussion type group, then you can do this as a discussion instead. So you can make a decision as to how you want to handle it based on the dynamics of your students. So each small group will get a set of the scenario and then the scenario decision. So one of the scenarios, the first scenario is Tasha is in charge of watching her 5-year-old sister Marcella for the day. Marcella keeps nagging Tasha to take her to see a movie that came out last weekend. Tasha has seen the movie with her friends and she thought it was good, but it was really violent and it was so scary that she screamed in the theater. What should she do? Okay? And so the students will get that scenario, they'll talk about it. If they're at the role-playing group, then someone will be Tasha, someone will be Marcella, and they will kind of role-play what that interaction would look like. And then what they'll do is they'll get the decision choices sheet as well. And so there are 4 decisions we've given them as to how Tasha could respond to this dilemma she's having. So she could take her to the movie. She could not take her to the movie, but find one more age appropriate. She asks her mom what she should do, or she yells at her sister to stop nagging and go watch television. Okay? So the students will have both of these, and they'll have a discussion. Even the role-playing group will have some kind of discussion as to which decision they think is best, and they'll come to a consensus on it, hopefully. And so they'll have a few minutes to work on that. We've got, let's see, 15 minutes in those smaller groups, so they can practice their role playing, they can have their discussions, and then after that, we bring it back to the larger group. And so you've got the 3 different groups who each had their own scenario and have made their decision as to what the best decision is. In the role playing group, if you're doing that with your students, then each group will have about 10 minutes to role play what happened. And then they'll talk about what they thought was the best decision to make, and kind of they can bring it to the larger group too and have a little discussion there. And then the next group will go, and then the last group will go. If you have a discussion group instead of doing the role playing, you can just kind of have them share out what they talked about and what they decided. Also, when they're doing that, they're going to talk about what they decided. And then as a group together, you're going to talk about, well, what might result from that decision. All right, so if they decided that Tasha should take her little sister to the movie, talk about, well, maybe she would have nightmares after that, or maybe it would be too scary for her. So what are some of the results of that decision? So really trying to get them, one, to think about all the information, then make a decision, then think about the consequences of that decision. So for each small group, you go through that process with them. Okay? Any questions on that so far? We think for the groups that like to be interactive that they're really going to enjoy this role play. I know with some of my high school students, they love to role play. So I think it'll be good. There's also on page 8 of your curriculum, it goes through the different decision choices and then also gives you possible results there. So like I said, you know, if Tasha decides to take her sister to the movie, one of the results of that could be that her sister gets really scared and has nightmares for a week. So you want the students to try and come up with the results, but then maybe you interject some as well and facilitate that conversation.
So the function of this exercise is to have the students formulate consequences to what's going on, have them think about the consequences.
Right. So think about making a decision and think about possible consequences of that decision, and then be able to understand that you're going to be responsible for those decisions that you make and what results as a result. So that's kind of what you're doing in the large group. They're either role-playing or telling you what they did, and then you're really getting them to think about, well, what would be the result of the decision you chose. And you can read through the scenarios. The scenarios are listed on page, starting on page 7. And then the decisions and results follow that. Okay, and then at the end, once you've had that large group discussion, there's a script there for you to follow, and what you're really going to do is you're going to be talking about what making good choices, the steps to making good choices. And so you're going to have this poster for you, and you go through kind of step 1, identify the challenge or opportunity, step 2, brainstorm possible solutions, you go through these steps, and then lastly, you evaluate the results of the decision and accept responsibility for the results of that decision. Okay? So this is meant to kind of segue into this idea of them making choices about high school and get them thinking about what the results of those decisions might be. Okay? Any other questions? So for the scenarios, you know, the students will have the copies for you so you can actually hand these to them. And then the making good choices, if you can put this up in the classroom and try and leave it up wherever you are so you can refer back to it, or they can have it in the classroom to look at going forward.
That's great. Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, we've said before, you know your groups, you know what works best for you, and your cohorts and your students. So when we were looking at this activity, we said, you know, some students are going to gravitate towards the role playing, and others are going to be very uncomfortable with being in front of their peers. And so that's why, again, you know the students in your cohort, what's going to work better. So that's why we said, you know, think about what's going to work best, and feel free to do the activity, whatever format would work for your students. So that's great. All of them will participate. Because Molly and I were talking when we did this, I would be all about the role playing, but she said she would rather do it the other format. So, so you know, it just depends on the students and on your group. So thank you for sharing that. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay, so we're going to move into the next activity, which starts on page 10, and it's the selecting the best fit high school. So I know in our previous trainings, we've talked about the high school choice fair. And so students will be attending the high school choice fair at the end of January. And so they will have the opportunity to talk with representatives from the high schools. Some of the representatives are administrators. We have teachers that come, as well as students. And students that are current students at that high school. So our 8th grade students have the opportunity to interface with the various roles at each of those high schools and to learn more about their program areas. So just to kind of paint the picture again of what the students will be going through, and then we'll talk about the high schools themselves. So the high school choice fair is at the Wolstein Center, and it's around what they call the arena area, so where the gym is. And so it's the concourse around there. And so the high schools are all set up around a circle, and students actually have 3 different rotations that they visit. So we've set the high schools into 3 sections of the concourse, and students have 20 minutes in each section. And there's about 7 to 10 high schools represented in each section of the rotation.
Okay.
So,
So is this something where they're bused there? I mean, they're all going to this?
Yes, they all go to it if they're present that day.
If they're there that day, sure. Okay.
So we provide them transportation, and this is all 8th graders in CMSD. So it's not just the students participating in True2U. It's all 3,200 8th graders participate in the high school choice fair. And so that is, they'll either attend Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And we have 3 rotations a day.
So Cleveland's a big city. How do they figure out to get there? If they got to go all the way, if the school they want's on the other side of town, is that information all provided?
Yes. So we have, so with the students, they are able to talk to our transportation department, as well as our TA is really wonderful working with our students. So our students can say, this is where I live, this is the high school I want to go to, what are my options? You know, is it the Rapid, is it the bus, what's the best option for our students? We provide students with public transportation as part of our choice system. So we do have some students that do decide to attend a school that may be across town from where they live. And so they may have to leave earlier in the morning to get to school on time. They may have to take 1 or 2 buses. Some of them take the rapid and then the bus to
But
get
that's
to
all
their
covered,
location.
they don't have to pay anything themselves, right?
No,
Nice.
cover that, yeah. And so, yes, so there is an evening portion of the fair, which is Wednesday night, and parents are encouraged to attend with their students, and we do have representatives from transportation at the fair during the school day, so when the 8th graders are there, but then we also have them in the evening session as well, so they can talk to parents more about that transportation. And so we are, part of our Cleveland plan and part of our goal is to actually have schools that mirror each other on the east side and west side. So for example, up until a few years ago, John Hay was the only school it was only on the east side, and it's a school that had early college programs. On the west side, we now have BARD, which is an early college program. So that's the goal, is to have schools on either side of the city so that our students don't have to travel all the way across town if there's a high school that's a good fit for them. So the idea is to mirror the programs on either side of the city to really alleviate that heavy travel for students. So part of this next activity that we're going to do is students are going to have the opportunity to learn more about the high schools. So on your tables, I believe you should all have the high school booklet. It's called the Showcase Booklet. As I mentioned before, and I'll just reiterate, this is the non-professional version in the sense of the design. Students actually get a glossy copy of this prior to the high school choice fair. So we created this, and the content is what will be in the booklet, but students will get an updated version of this before they come to the fair in January, and it's actually a really nice polished look, but because of the timeline of production, the glossy version's not completed yet, so this is what they're going to have for the session with you. But again, in January, early January, before they even come to the fair, they'll get that glossy version, which will be very similar information. Because again, all the 8th graders come to the fair, so all the 8th graders get this booklet. So in the schools that are not part of the True2U program this year, they're getting an abridged version of what you're doing with them next week. So they'll have the opportunity to go on to Naviance and do the career interest survey, similar to what students did for session 3. And then they will identify 2 to 3 careers that they want to learn more about. And then thinking about those, then align that to at least 6 high schools that they want to visit at the fair, which is what you're going to be doing with them as part of this activity for session 4. Okay, so let's jump into the high school choice booklet. So you'll notice on the front page, here we have the high school name and why I'm interested. So you will see as part of the lessons, students will have the opportunity to work with 1 or more partners who start identifying the 6 schools that they think they want to visit. And they'll be able to debrief why they want to visit those schools. So for example, if I found through the work of the last 3 sessions that I am very interested in animal science or in a profession that has to work with animals, most likely I'm going to be very interested to visit Washington Park because they have an animal science program. And so I would put in here Washington Park Environmental Science Academy. And then I would put, why am I interested? I'm interested because I know I really like to work with animals. I'm interested in a career working with animals. So that is the goal, that they would find 6 high schools that they want to visit at the fair. And they can tweak this. So, you know, if you work with them next week, they're going to have a little bit more interaction from their teacher before the fair. So this might change a little, and that's okay. But it's just a starting point for them to start thinking about those high schools and why. So that going back to that informed choices, making good choices, thinking about the best fit high school, they can really start reflecting as to why that might be a good high school for them.
People could be taking this home with them?
Yes.
Families.
Yep. Yeah, they can take these home. And then again, they'll get the glossier version, and they can revisit this session as well. So revisit the 6 schools that they want to learn more about.
So we don't keep these in their folder, we actually don't have these.
So it's a good question. So I would keep them in their folders until they get back from winter break. And they're going to be revisiting this with their teachers and getting the glossier version of it so they can transfer the information. And so the booklets are to go with the parents after the high school choice fair. So the reason why I say after winter break is then it's there. It may not come back, with break and leading into that season.
Just refresh my memory, do we have a January session before the?
No.
I don't think so.
No, this is the starting point, and then because True2U is new for us, and we only have the 23 schools participating this year, all students will be getting exposure to the high schools prior to the fair. So they will revisit this information and some further activities with their teachers. So for the schools that are part of True2U, their activity is going to look a little different in January than the schools that have not been participating, because that will be the first time they get this information about the high schools.
Yeah, I'm a little slow.
That's okay.
So as mentors, we don't need to know which schools offer what, right? We're not going to be expected on December 10th
To be experts.
to be experts in guiding the students as to, oh, this was your career cluster, so
Right.
you ought to.
Right.
That's right, right.
They're
We're
going to
not
have
going
an
to be.
opportunity to work in smaller groups to look at this information and start making those choices. And then when you come back as a larger group, then there's some debrief questions about how did they get to their choices.
Okay.
But we wanted to make sure you had this beforehand so you can do a glance over, but yes, you're not expected to be experts. No. So what I wanted to do is just point out a couple things, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to look over this, to just talk again, share best practices of how you might approach this, and then ask questions. But I did want to point out that in the descriptions, what we did for this piece is I talked about the admission criteria, so I'm going to go over that in a couple minutes, and then I did the career alignment, the career clusters. So in a few sessions, you've been talking to the students about the career clusters. So I went through and aligned all of the high schools and the career clusters that they offer courses in. Now, one thing I want for it to be clear is that, most of these areas, most of these career clusters, they have courses that are related to that career field. So for example, if a student were to go to Washington Park and participate in the animal science program, they will graduate with college level course credits, but they cannot become vet techs immediately after high school. They would still have to go through a post-secondary pathway. I know you know that, but it's just good when you're talking with students that this is really foundational courses that help students starting to get prepared for the field that they're interested in pursuing after high school. The other piece of it is too, is that students are probably going to bring this up. I might be interested in animal science now, but I might find out later down the road that I'm interested in something else. So all the skills and the information they learn in their courses is transferable because it is foundational courses. So those are very science-heavy courses, so they might find there's a different career in science that they're interested in, but they've had a lot of foundational courses in the animal science program that have helped them prepare. They have anatomy and physiology at the high school level. That's a course that many professions, many majors, you have to take that course, especially in the science field. So that's just for students to have that knowledge. And so you'll notice that some of them have multiple career pathways, or career clusters, that are represented, and that's because of the course offering.
I'm going to place a sheet of this in the side.
Oh.
Is that a sheet that summarizes comprises the career clusters in the schools?
Oh, under here, it's under here. So it says admissions criteria and then career clusters. It's in the book. Oh, do you want that? We can do that.
You know,
We can
that
make
was
that.
actually a good, that's a clever idea, because that would be really useful in the classroom.
Yeah.
Just in the, somebody would say, oh, this is this class, then we're not picking through.
Sure.
That's a good
Yeah, we
idea.
can do that.
That's a great idea.
So we can just tease out, yeah. So we'll do, for example, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM. A lot of our schools have STEM related, like engineering courses are fairly popular in our schools. Robotics falls under that. And so that we have a close partnership with Tri-C as a district, and so many of the courses are offered through Tri-C's course offerings in our schools. So that's a great suggestion, and we'll do that. So the one thing I wanted to know about the admissions criteria, and some of you probably have heard me explain this before, but I just want to go over it one more time. So majority of our schools are considered open enrollment. And so open enrollment means that there is an online portal, and it's going to be a new one this year for students. It's through the company's SchoolKnit. And it's going to be an online link that basically they link to. And they can go onto that and rank their high school choices. So if they know Max Hayes is their first choice, they would put Max Hayes, choice 1. They might then put Washington Park, choice 2, James Ford Rhodes, choice 3, however they want to do it. So they rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So the goal of the district is to give students one of their top 3 choices. So there are a couple scenarios that can play out. If a student were to put Max Hayes as choice 1, Max Hayes typically can bring in about 120 new 9th graders. If 130 students, 8th graders, said that's my first choice, there would be a lottery. And so the lottery process happens in early March. And so essentially it's a computerized lottery. So however the lottery works itself through the formula, then 120 students will receive Max Hayes as their first choice. And then the 10 others that indicated that as their first choice would be put on a waiting list. And then for those 10 students that were put on the waiting list, they would start then looking at their next choices and giving them an assignment of either their second or third choice, depending on, again, if there's the space capacity. If they were to choose a school, so we'll just say, for example, Lincoln West, and they can bring in 200 9th graders, and only 198 said that that's their first choice, all 198 would get that. Or even if 200 said, this is my first choice, and they have capacity for 200, all 200 would get that, their first choice. So that's essentially how it works. So the lottery only goes into effect if there are more students than capacity that are interested in their first choice. There are some schools that are criteria schools, and so they have actual steps that a student has to go through to apply, and then the school has the discretion to accept them. So for example, Cleveland School of the Arts, it's an interview and performance. So they actually have a performance that they have to do in front of a panel of judges. There's a rubric that the judges score them on. There's also an interview process, and then they have to submit some information. So if they are someone who is interested in the writing major at Cleveland School of the Arts, they would have to submit some of their work. If they're interested in the drawing, the drawing major, they would have to submit their portfolio of artwork. If they are interested in more of the performance, they actually have to do a performance as part of the interview process. After that process is done, and it's usually a 2 to 3 step process, the school then makes their decisions. So that's not part of the open enrollment process. That's not, that's left up to the school and how they make their decisions. John Hay, so again, there's 3 schools at John Hay. There's architecture and design, science and medicine, and then early college. They have an application that does include an essay, and it looks very similar to what a student would see on a college application. They also have to interview. They actually receive a tour of the school, and they talk with staff as part of that tour. And then their scores from the previous year, so 7th grade. They took their end of course assessments. Those scores are looked at as a part of the decision-making process as well. So there's actual criteria. We used to live in the world of OAA, so they would have to get a 400 or above on that, but now it's a different world. Any of you that have students still in school, now it's the end of course assessment, so it's either PARC or AIR, now it's just AIR. So the score threshold's a little different. You don't have to really worry about that, but just know that they have to go through an interview process and an application. And again, it's up to the school to decide if they're accepted to that high school. Then there is Whitney Young. Whitney Young students have to actually be tested and receive the classification or the classification of gifted and talented. So most students receive that earlier in their educational system, and so many of our students have been gifted and talented since kindergarten, and they have the opportunity to go to Whitney Young if they want to. And then there is, I think that was it, right? Yeah, so 3 high schools, and then gifted and talented and things like that. Any questions on that? Okay, so we'll take about 3 minutes to look through this activity just to see if you have any other questions or thoughts about it. All right, if you don't have any other questions, we'll conclude. Always feel free to reach out to us. This will be archived, so you can watch the session again. Again, just email us if you have any other questions. Thank you for your time this evening, and enjoy next week. Thank you.